In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stoffer, and we are having another wonderful episode with my incredible sister, Jill Dickey. Hi, Jill. How you doing?
Hi, Eric. So fun to be back.
Yeah, here we are back at it again. Uh, at the time of this recording, our first episode is launching tomorrow. So, are you nervous about that?
No, no. I mean, this is what it is, right? We put it out there,
That's
do our
right.
best. Yeah.
We hope it helps people.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's kind of weird talking about what might happen, even though when they're hearing this, it'll be the second episode. So,
Yeah.
well, okay, Jill, let's dive right in. I want to talk. One of the things that has often come up for me and my family as we've worked through a lot of mental health challenges and in therapy is this concept of differentiation versus enmeshment. Those are words that come up a lot. They're often intimidating words. Anytime I'm trying to have a conversation with someone about it, it's almost like they get frustrated with those words because they seem kind of, I don't know, like it's difficult to understand. So, if we're going to really understand these concepts, I think it would be great if you could explain those concepts to us and what they mean for our relationships and our mental health and so on. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I'm super excited that you invited me to talk about these topics because it's my favorite thing to talk about. Yeah.
And is it your favorite thing because you've seen how crucial it is in your therapy or in your own life? Just from a personal perspective, why have you found it to be so beneficial before
Um,
we seek to understand it?
yeah, first and foremost, definitely when I learned the concept myself, and started to apply the things that I learned, my life improved exponentially, especially my own peace of mind and then my relationships. And that's not to say my relationships are perfect, but they've gotten a lot better since I learned these concepts. And then, of course, I think I mentioned this before, but most of my clinical work, I work with couples who are trying to improve the state of their marriage, their partnership, and these concepts are essential. And when people apply them, things definitely improve. So I do love talking about this.
And maybe this question is a little bit too before you explain it, but do you feel like it's that we struggle with this so much because it's natural? Do you feel like it's more nurture environments? Is it the combination of the two that leads to our lack of differentiating and more to enmeshed relationships?
Oh, that's kind of a loaded question. Th I think that I would say first on off the top of my head, the reason why we struggle with this is because becoming a more differentiated person is a developmental reality.
Hmm.
And so we're all in the process, hopefully, of learning to do this. And it's skills that we have to develop, and it takes a lot of maturity. And so I don't think that there's a place where you arrive as a fully differentiated person,
Right.
but you're always in this process. And right. And then you kind of are pointing a little bit to like origin stories of like families we came out of. And it does make a difference, how differentiated your family of origin was, can influence how difficult it can be for you to work through that process. And so it does have an impact.
Yeah. So you and I coming from the same household, um, but not necessarily the same, right? Because
Hmm.
you as the only daughter, that's going to be a different scenario. Me as the third child, you're the oldest child. Parents evolve and become over time, and so each child obviously gets different experiences, but generally, you and I came from a similar household. And since I'll be kind of a guinea pig in this discussion, do you feel like our upbringing um, led to complications with enmeshment versus differentiation?
Yes, because I think all families do, right? I've never met a family that's like perfectly differentiated from each other. This is difficult to do. And as we talk about this, you will see. But I think there were elements in our household and that were nurtured in our household that help us to differentiate
Right.
and grow in that way, and things that were, kind of detrimental to that. But I think that's most families, if not all of them. And so it's just a matter of gaining awareness and being able to learn about this and see where work needs to be done, and then committing to, working on that within
Right.
yourself. And that's what I'm excited about, what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of work, and that's what I've
Mhm.
learned. So I'm excited to dive into this. So before we get going in defining it, so basically, it's you don't want to think in binary. You don't want to think. I think we mentioned
Either
that
or.
last week, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
think in just either or. That
Mhm.
this is a spectrum of development, and it needs time and it needs work, and we have to use that power of choice to engage in developing the skill more.
Yeah, I like to make sure we're thinking in terms of we're in process,
Yeah,
right? This is a process, it's a lifetime effort. And this is just informational to help you get traction on which direction you're headed.
yeah.
Hmm.
So it's not about pointing fingers as
Hmm.
much as it is just kind of assessing our situations and seeing where we can improve them.
Well, let's say it like this. I've been studying this stuff for a decade now and talking about this almost every day in my work. And there are times when I fall back into enmeshed ways of being and my differentiation skills go out the window and, oh, whoops, I'm
Right.
back in it. And other times when I'm like, oh man, I did really well there. I was very mature in the way that I handled that. And so it's a process.
Yeah. Even just having the ability to flag it when it happens
Hmm.
it's taking me years to try and figure that out.
Yeah,
So,
and I hope that's what we can accomplish today is just getting
yeah.
people their awareness level up, so they can pay attention to what's going on.
Awesome.
Hmm.
That's great. All right.
So
Well,
should we
why don't you,
start with
yeah, let's start with some defining and helping us understand it first.
okay, you mentioned this, but differentiation, enmeshment, these are big words and they're fancy words. What do they mean? Okay. And I wish it was a simple thing to talk about, but it's a little bit complicated. So I'm going to do the best that I can here today. When used in a scientific sense, the word differentiation, it's the process of cells becoming naturally more distinct from one another in more specialized ways. Okay, so if a biologist is talking about differentiation, this is what they're talking about. But we don't just differentiate physically as we develop and grow, right? We can also become more differentiated emotionally and psychologically from, say, our family of origin or other people that we're in close relationship with. So, when we talk about the theory of differentiation, we are talking about a theory or an idea that was developed by a practitioner named Murray Bowen, who was a prominent American psychiatrist in the 50s or 60s. And he was among the pioneers that developed family systems theory.
Right. So family
Um,
systems, I've heard of that.
yes. And so the term differentiation as it relates to family systems theory was first introduced by Murray Bowen.
Okay.
So we're going to be talking about his ideas and how they apply to the individual in a system.
Awesome.
Okay. So any questions so
Yeah.
far? Hmm.
Um, in your primary definition of differentiation, it can sometimes, at least I find my mind going there, that the development of individualization can feel like a pulling away rather than a connecting.
Hmm.
Um, and is that inaccurate or is it accurate? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. It's both
Yeah.
because I think the more you can kind of pull away, and I don't know if those are the right words,
Right.
but become more individuated as a person, you are developing a deeper and more robust capacity to then connect.
Right. And the reason why I use the phrase pull away is because when I have tried to develop differentiation, I feel like I'm pulling away, and the
Hmm.
people that I feel like I'm pulling away from feel like I'm pulling away from them.
Yeah, it
And
can feel like
so
that.
even though I know that the investment of that, again, pulling away is not the right word, but the investment that I'm making in doing the differentiation will actually benefit that relationship eventually.
Hmm.
They might, just because they're not on the same learning, uh, not in the same experience that I am, they may not know that I'm actually investing in my relationship with that individual.
Yeah, they may not. And I think this will become more clear as I talk to you about a little bit more about
Okay,
differentiation. We'll make it more
awesome.
clear. So, to understand the concept of differentiation, you have to understand something basic about human beings. All right. And that is the fact that we have these two needs deep inside of each one of us as human beings. We have this strong desire, almost survival reality to be in connection with other people.
Right.
All right. We literally need others to survive and thrive as individuals. And so we have this deep desire to be accepted and wanted and loved and part of a group, part of a romantic partnership, part of a family, part of a institution, part of a neighborhood, part of a
Community.
community. Yeah.
Hmm.
And we all want that. We want to be loved and chosen and we want to belong. So this is a really important survival reality in human beings that we think about a lot and we use a lot of our energy to accomplish. But oftentimes we forget that we also have this other need that's just as deep and just as profound, and that is our desire for autonomy. So we need the desire to become a fully developed individual and belong to ourselves, right? We want to belong to our own wishes and desires. We want to belong to our own development. We don't want to just fold in and collapse into the wishes and wants of others, although we want to belong, but we want the freedom to attend to ourselves and to expand our selfhood. So right there, with those two things working inside each one of us, you can see
Yep.
that this is challenging, right? And
It's like
both,
just internal conflict, because if I
yeah.
feel like I have to be a part of community, but a part of my sense of self does not agree with that community, it
Mhm.
feels like a divorce of some kind.
Yeah, it's really tough. And so
Yeah.
both of these needs are so important and they do kind of wrestle with each other internally. We wrestle around these two needs. And when someone is, well, you can see that this takes a lot of maturity to be able to learn to balance these two needs, right?
Right.
So when in lower levels of development, when we're struggling with differentiation and when we're enmeshed with others, we're struggling to balance these two needs. And so sometimes we can find ourselves over identifying with the connection piece of this. And we can, be overly fused with other people, with the wants and needs of others, and be really anxious about connection and, kind of lose ourselves in the pursuit of connection.
Right.
And then if we're struggling on the other side, we can be too autonomous
Right.
and too overly focused on preserving selfhood. And then we can struggle with meeting the needs and being part of a group, which is also really important. So you can see that this is a real challenge to develop the skills to be able to balance these correctly
And the
in
fact
ways
that
that work.
it's like in our basic DNA
Yeah.
of humanity to
Hmm.
belong to someone and have that sense of self.
Yeah.
Um, do you feel in the first one that you said, where we get too entrenched in the philosophy of community, um, do you feel like social media has exacerbated that? And the only reason I ask that is because it seems like if we're feeling like the amount of likes or views or something like that that we get, then fans that flame of, yes, I have this connection, and then when those things go down, we lose our
Yeah.
feeling of
Yeah.
of who I am.
That's pointing to one really good example of somebody who's struggling with this balance, right? Of like, well, I'm only going to feel okay about myself if I have so many likes, and so many followers on my social media. And if I don't get the responses that I'm looking for, then I can't, it's really hard for me to hold on to a sense of self. And so it
Yeah,
can be challenging, and if you find yourself, if you're listening to me and to you talking and you're saying, oh man, like I struggle with both of those. I struggle
yeah.
with, the being overly accommodating and overly connected. I don't even, that's the
People
thing, overly
pleasing.
connected, but people pleasing. Yeah. Then, or oh yeah, man, I can't, I'm maybe not able to stay in connection with others and I kind of tend to be avoidant. what I would say to that is welcome to the human experience.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is not an easy thing to learn to balance. And so this is why it's developmental, why it's about learning and growth and development. And I honestly think these two forces within us are kind of this beautiful pressure that is on us to help us grow and mature.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can feel distressing sometimes, but it really is good.
I want to point one thing out just for our listeners. One thing I feel you're really good at, Jill, is that I have a temptation to be more prescriptive or draw really extreme conclusions because I feel like it helps me find my balance. But I love in your response that you don't just agree with the extreme conclusion that I've drawn. You stay more objective in the concept.
Mm.
And the only reason I just add that little side note is I feel like that's so helpful in a for a therapist that I'm not sitting there just drawing these big extremes and not giving play to them, not giving flexibility to those
Hmm.
concepts.
Yeah, we're complex
Yeah.
as human beings, right? And so things aren't, there's always not an easy explanation for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although we tend to want to do that, make it simple. Hmm.
Yeah. And if I was being really dramatic into my sense of community, I would really expect you to say, "Oh, thank you for saying that." But I don't have to. I don't have to do that because I don't care if you say thank you or not.
Well, it's always nice to say thank you, but
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know what we're struggling with as human beings, right? And that finding the balance between these two things is where differentiation is born. This way of becoming that allows us to balance these two needs in healthy ways that help us individually and help us in our relationships with each other.
So
And
before you get into that, let me just clarify. So when you're talking about the extremes of that spectrum, too entrenched in community versus too entrenched in isolationism. So the isolationism would be differentiation in an unhealthy way, and the sense of community would be enmeshment in an unhealthy way. Is that accurate?
I think both are enmeshed
Oh,
because,
okay.
yes, because if you can't regulate yourself in connection, you're not differentiated. Okay. You're
Okay.
still overly enmeshed with other people's energies, moods, opinions, thoughts, right? And because you're overly enmeshed with those things, you have to disconnect.
So if I
Which,
were to use my hands to illustrate this, on
mhm,
this end of the spectrum, that's enmeshment. On this end of the spectrum, that's enmeshment. Differentiation's the balance between the two.
right. Getting help, yeah. And this will become more clear too, right? Both
Okay.
are enmeshed because they're overly dependent on the functioning of others in order for yourself to function well. And these are the ways you handle it.
Awesome.
Okay, does that make more sense?
Love it. Yep. Very
Okay.
helpful.
So essentially, differentiation is developing the ability to stay connected to your thoughts, values, and feelings, being true to who you are, okay, while you're also able to stay in honest connection with others, especially to those people that are really important to you. Okay.
Yep.
And another way to think about it is our ability to be close and connected without getting overly reactive. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's not easy, right?
Yep.
Unless you find that very easy. I mean, I,
No,
I don't, but
I do not. I do
okay.
not.
Okay. So if you're thinking about this, you're listening and you're thinking about this, maybe you're thinking, how differentiated am I? And how do I know how differentiated I am? Okay. And again, there's not this like place you arrive. It's kind of a continuum of growth. So there's some things that you can think about when you're thinking about your level of differentiation.
Awesome.
Okay. So when you're kind of underdeveloped in the area of differentiation and those abilities and skills that we're going to talk about, we tend to do one of three things, in these three categories. Our behavior tends to show up in these three categories
In an enmeshed way.
yeah, when we're in,
Okay.
in a mesh situation, our differentiation level's kind of low.
Yep.
We tend to do one of three things in reaction to other people. Okay.
Okay.
The first one, I read this somewhere and I don't know who coined this term, but I thought it was hilarious. It's called the Holy Trinity of blocking. Okay.
Hmm.
Which means these are the three categories in which we'll move into when we don't like what's happening in our relationship with other people and we're trying to block out the discomfort that we're feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll try to control people. We're like, oh, I don't like how I feel when this person's doing this, and so I'm going to try to control them in kind of an overt sort of way. All
Right.
right. So we'll have to feel like we need to control others, and we might do that with anger or force or threat, that kind of a thing. That's kind of overt control. The other category in the Trinity is we will overly yield to others. You keep saying people pleasing. This is kind of where this category falls in. It's like, oh, I'm not feeling comfortable in this relationship. I'm not sure if I'm safe here, if everything's okay. So I'm going to start yielding to you. And I'm going to start doing anything you need me to do to make you love me and choose me, but it might be um too much, and I
Right.
might be giving up a lot of self to do this.
Right.
Okay. And then the third category is what we've talked about already, is we might disinvest or disengage. Okay.
Yeah.
And those are the three things that we do to kind of try to manage the anxiety that we feel in relationship to other people when our differentiation is low
So let me
in
ask
the
you
moment.
this, because as a religious person, the red flag that goes up for me in those definition of those three things, the first one I would say, okay, obviously that's abusive. You're controlling someone else. You're removing their agency. That is not okay. In the third one, I would say, okay, you're missing out on this opportunity to serve and to help and to have great relationships in your life that would benefit both you and the person that you're engaged with. But the second one, it stops me in my tracks because I feel like, oh, selflessness or serving or kindness is rewarded in the faith dynamic. And
Hmm.
so it's like, oh, anything that push tells me that I shouldn't be doing that is it is coming from a bad source. Do you get what I'm saying there?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so now that was my initial understanding. As I went on further, and maybe this is something you're getting to, is that I actually found that it made me much more. If I'm not people pleasing, I'm now able to do it from a differentiated standpoint, and then I'm offering it not out of duty or out of burden or pressure, but out of my own will,
Hmm.
which is such a big difference
Hmm.
in my choices to exercise my faith.
Hmm.
So I don't mean
Yes.
to be like derail that conversation, but if our listeners are hearing that, I don't want them to go to just shut it out because they think, "Oh, that's telling me to be more selfish. I'm not gonna give that any credibility."
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you're trying to say. One of the words that came to mind when you were describing why you would do something, you know, why would you give service or extend yourself for others in the negative sense, in the maladaptive sense, would
Right.
be out of earning.
Yep.
Like I'm doing this to earn a self that I don't have.
Yes.
Right. And so it's like, well, I have to overly extend myself for other people. I've got to do everything that they're asking of me, even if my battery is empty, I'm completely depleted, I'm losing track of me. But I feel anxious about this, and I've got to do this because if I don't, then I won't matter and I won't be worth connecting to.
Right.
Right. And that is a really like a soul-sucking way to be doing, you know, um,
Our relationships
service.
become so transactional that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you can do the same exact behavior from a higher place within you. In this, how I like to think about it. This is good for me to do because service and giving is good for the soul. This is good for the group that I'm in, right? And my choice to do this is coming from the best in me.
Hmm.
It's not coming from the worst in me, which is this kind of desperate need to be seen as good, to be
Yeah.
seen as needed so that I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And I want
it's
to be
like
careful. That's hard because
for
we all
sure,
have a little bit of that in us, right?
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's um it's just so crucial that we recognize that this is a process
Mm-hmm.
and to be patient with it,
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of, like we said, the phrase pulling away at first to become more differentiated can
Mm-hmm.
seem to the outside, uh, uh, to the viewer on the outside, they might look at it and go, that's so selfish, they're pulling away, they're being unkind or something like that. That's not the point. The point is to invest in differentiation, a healthier way of living, so
Mm-hmm.
that it will actually be an investment for that relationship.
Yeah, and interestingly, what you're pointing to is, you're leading you right to the next thing I want to talk
Perfect.
about. You're so good at it. But you're saying, "Oh, if I say no to this, they're going to think that I'm not a good person, that I'm not loving, that I'm not Christ-like, that I'm not, service-oriented enough." And that's going to create some anxiety in you.
Yes.
Right. And so it's going to be you learning how to manage that anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And not just acting out of that anxious part of you that's worried about how others see you, and trying to reach for and find a wiser part of you
Yeah.
where you can make those decisions.
Yep.
And it's really a challenging thing. You have to metabolize a lot of anxiety to work on this. And so for some people, it may be, oh, that person's going to feel this. Well, they might. They might
Yeah.
think that about you.
Yeah.
And that may make you anxious, but can you go and work on that anxiety? Okay.
Yeah.
So that leads me to, like I said, you're leading me right to this place because I want our listeners to have some takeaways around things that they can do concretely to work on this. All right. So there are four skills that I want to talk about today that we can focus on developing in ourselves to raise our level of differentiation. All right.
Awesome.
For those who want to know, I took these four skills out of a book called, um, oh gosh, The Secret to Passionate Marriage or something like that by an author, a practitioner named David Schnarch. So you can look that up and I can give you resources at the end too.
Schnarch.
Yes, it's an interesting name.
I
I think
love
it's
that name.
German. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about these four skills. And when I'm working on my own differentiation level and really being mindful about it, I'm thinking about these four skills. And the first one is the ability, and these aren't going to be easy, okay? So I don't want to simplify them too much, but an ability to hold on to who you are and who you are not yet when you're close to other people that you care about, okay? So you need to, that adage, know thyself.
Right.
Okay. This is that idea. Okay. Be connected to who you are, know your strengths, and be open to knowing your weaknesses, right? Being very clear about that. Own your own stuff. This is about, stopping suppression, um, denying or disassociating from your shadow self or the parts of you that are harder to face, right? But also knowing where you're doing well and finding that clarity around that. Be familiar and comfortable with your different self states, both positive and negative. Okay, does
See,
that
yeah,
sound like an easy task to
no,
you?
no, it
Okay.
doesn't, because you know me, you know that I would love to hide all of my weaknesses.
Hmm.
And I'm sure this is all humans, but
Hmm.
I just especially feel that I'd love to hide all of my weaknesses, and I don't want them to be seen, but it's not very realistic and really a high maintenance approach to life. When I'm conversing with various individuals from various backgrounds, and I have to manage whether or not they see me perfectly positively.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that because I see two orientations around that. I see the one that you're pointing to, which is, I want to stay safe with others by not letting them see my flaws, right? So I'm going to put my best foot forward. I'm going to hide my limitations and weaknesses, make sure I maintain that kind of one up
Right.
persona, right? But on the flip side, I see other people who tend to lead with their weaknesses. Oh, I'm always bad. I'm always broken. It's always me. I'm always the problem, right? I'm just worthless. And both of those orientations, the one up and the one down, are both low differentiation positions because neither one of them are honest and accurate.
And it's almost like they're both searching for the same motive, just in
Hmm.
different ways, right?
Yep.
The one I want them to think positively of me, it's because I'm able to portray that. The
Hmm.
other one is I want them to prove me wrong by speaking negatively of me, and
Hmm.
then it will confirm that they think I'm okay. So
Yeah.
both are just wanting to know that they're okay.
Yes. Yes. And so it's, kind of just two ways to orient to our sense of self
Right.
around that. Okay. The second skill that we need, and like that first one, that's a hard one. I mean, we
Right.
really could do a couple other podcasts just talking about these four skills in more
You know,
depth.
I'm thinking maybe we should do that. Why don't we highlight the remaining three, and then
Hmm.
we come back for a
More
podcast
in
or two
depth.
to go in depth on those. That would be great.
Okay, that's great because that first one, just knowing yourself and
Yeah.
gaining that solid sense of self could be a whole podcast on its own, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the other three that I'm going to say, I think they're highly related to each other. So we could do another episode just talking about these three. So I'll highlight them quickly in the
Yeah.
interest of time, but just listeners know we're going to go back and flesh this out a little bit more.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's great.
So skill number two is the ability to emotionally regulate or self-soothe. Okay, this is something we all can learn to do and become more capable of doing because a lot of times we reach out when we feel anxious or upset or dysregulated in our connection with other people, we reach out and try to get others to soothe us. And it's natural, it's normal, and sometimes it works. All right. But it's not sustainable. When we can self-soothe or we have the ability to regulate our own anxiety and our own emotionality, it's a skill that if we develop, we can really learn to show up solid and clear and lovingly to other people rather than to use them to soothe us down because we lack that skill and that
Hmm.
ability. So if you think about it, and we can really dig into this in a subsequent episode, but learning to emotionally regulate and to self-soothe is the most loving thing you can do in a relationship because then you will stop using others to regulate you and you'll be able to show up and let them be them.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
just that is totally me. Like if I could figure out a better way to self-soothe,
Hmm.
I would stop trying to have all these efforts to
Hmm.
prove that that soothing is outside of me.
Yeah. And that's why I think we could do a whole podcast
Yep.
episode on emotional regulation because I want to give a lot of grace here. It's a really difficult skill, especially in relationship to people we really care about, like in intimate relationships
Right.
with a spouse, with a child, with a parent, with a sibling, with a best friend. We care so much about that connection that it can be really hard to self-regulate
Yeah.
and to get clarity. But when we do that, we can stay grounded and clear within ourselves and we can handle what the other person is doing in wiser ways as well. So it's just a really important skill. And then really, really, um, well, I'll say one more thing about that. When you can regulate yourself, that allows you to really take another person in to really know who they are, because then they don't have to become a version of what you need them to be so that you'll be
Hmm.
okay. All right. So you
Yeah.
can really
Once
know another
again,
person. Hmm.
there that is. That's the
Yeah.
thing is it might have the facade of selfishness,
Hmm.
but it is not. It's one of the kindest things that we can do is
Yeah.
learn how to self-soothe.
The more I work with couples, the more I realize how foundational and how fundamental that is to a healthy marriage,
Yeah.
is to be able to do that emotional regulation piece. And it takes practice. Yes. The third one is really closely related to this, and it's the ability to control your reactivity. Because the more reactive we get, the more separation happens between people. Okay. So if you don't know who you are and you get all, flustered around that, if your emotional regulation is low, you're going to get reactive, right?
Yeah.
And I heard David Schnarch talking about this once, and he was saying that, the more reactive a species is out in the wild, the further they live apart
Hmm.
in nature, and think about how closely we live with other humans,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yep.
we've got to get a hold of that reactivity or we're going to blow this thing up. Okay.
Yeah.
So we gotta
Especially with
watch
these
that.
new like neighborhoods that you have a foot between the houses.
Yeah,
We're in each
exactly. We
we're
got
in
to
each
get
other's
along, people.
business all the time. We're not good at this.
Yes, yes. And and when we're emotionally regulated, we find our wise mind, you know. We are able to solve complex problems together as people. We really can.
More
Okay, and
synergetic
yeah,
type thinking rather
yeah.
than
I see
reactive.
couples really work through really difficult things when they can figure out how to find this calmer space inside them, right?
Awesome.
And the fourth one is this is so important, and I think we could do a whole episode on this too. Look at us, we're just planning for future episodes.
Hmm.
The ability to tolerate discomfort for growth, because human relationships are just elegant mechanisms for human growth and development. We care so much about our relationships. They matter so much. Remember that connection piece, right? And so if we want them to become strong and better and healthier and more stable and more loving and more safe, we've got to learn to tolerate the discomfort that's going to require for us to build these skills. And so we're going to be uncomfortable,
Yes.
and learning to tolerate that discomfort is paramount.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got some work ahead of us here, Jill.
Yeah, we do. I do
And
think oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and I'm willing to be the guinea pig here. Just I love learning about these skills and I know that I need them to have better relationships.
We all do. And like I said, I keep saying this, but it's just true. It takes practice,
Right.
right? And that's why I love working with relationships with people because relationships give us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to practice these skills. And when we develop the skills, we grow our maturity and our development as people. And so relationships are so essential to our ability to grow and to be wiser versions of ourselves.
I think about this all the time. Emily and I've been married 23 years now, and when things are difficult, you get this kind of fight or flight mode, right?
Hmm.
Like to fight means to argue, and argue means contention. Contention means it's not
Well,
healthy,
there's your reactivity and lack of
right?
emotional regulation. Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Or the flight, which is another reactivity. It's to,
Hmm.
it's like you throw in the towel kind of a concept.
Hmm.
But this phrase I always think about this phrase all the time, but we haven't come this far only to come this far.
Hmm.
And if we can see learning these psychological and social skills, these
Hmm.
relationship skills, then we don't have to abandon any of the growth and progress, no matter how bumpy the road has been,
It's true.
because we bring hope for the future. So it's literally we haven't come this far to only come this far. There are ways to keep going.
Yeah. David Schnarch always talks about a concept called meaningful endurance, right?
Yeah.
That this is meaningful. This process we're in as human beings is meaningful, and it does require endurance because there are going to be times when you're like, you know what, this is too hard. It's too hard,
It's
right?
like it's like good
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah, it's true. Good trouble. So before we end, I just want to talk about a couple things that differentiation is not, because
Yes.
I understand that sometimes when I'm teaching this, people get the wrong understanding of what differentiation is. Kind of like they can take it to the extreme and say, oh, so we're just automaton robots floating around in bubbles, not bouncing up against each other. And that's not correct. We are impacting each other all the time, right? And we are impacted by others. So, I want to just say a couple things about this. Differentiation is not the opposite of emotional closeness. All right. Differentiation allows for and creates a balance of connection and autonomy that allows us to be emotionally close in healthier ways.
Yeah,
Okay.
that goes back to what I was asking
Yeah.
earlier.
You're just alone over there. And yes,
Right.
we need to tolerate the feeling of being alone while we work on ourselves and regulate ourselves so that we can go back and reconnect in less reactive ways.
Right.
Right. But it's all this is to say we're doing this so we can be emotionally close and intimate and open and honest
Yeah,
and connected.
fantastic.
Okay.
Exactly.
Differentiation is not avoiding intimacy. Okay. And when I say intimacy, I mean let's see, what am I saying? The process of knowing another person and letting them know you.
Yeah, closeness. It's not just
Yes.
a sexual relationship.
Yes, exactly. So developing more maturity in this differentiated way allows people to show up and really know another person in the deepest way while allowing yourself to be known in the deepest
Mhm.
way. Okay. And then, of course, and I think this is important, especially in our day and age, differentiation is not individualism. It's not egocentric. Okay. It involves an awareness of your impact on others and an ability to take the needs and priorities of others into account. Okay.
That's such a current issue, I think.
Hmm.
In that it's almost like society is embracing this sense of individualism, but they're doing it, oftentimes they're doing it without the concept of differentiation.
Hmm.
So it actually does lead to isolationism.
Hmm. And the individual matters. I mean, what we do individually matters and our
Right.
selfhood matters, but we can overcorrect for that and forget to take in the importance of connection and community and that we love and support each other. And so differentiation, when you become more differentiated, you can take in the needs of others, the desires of others, and you can deal with them with that in honest ways. You'll also be more willing to look at your impact on other people, especially if it's negative, because that will matter to you. All right.
Right.
And so when differentiation skills rise, we are more accountable people. We are more aware of our impact on others and we want it to be good. And when it's not good, we want to address that. All right. Um, so those are the things I want people to keep in mind that that's not, we're not, that differentiation is about connection and about closeness when we can do it. But there is that individual maturity that is needed
I
that
think
we're going
that's
to develop.
so helpful because if we have a tendency to think in binary means, then we'll go to these extremes, but we've got to see that development. Enmeshment is over here and over here. Differentiation is a balance that's healthy in the middle. And when we're trying to understand differentiation, we can't be too extreme in our conclusions because then we get
Yeah.
into all those things you just listed of what they are
Well,
not.
and I keep coming up with ideas for another podcast, but we could also talk about boundaries because
Yeah,
we learn a lot about healthy boundaries in relationships and how important they are. But differentiation is key to being able to set healthy boundaries, right? And to
yeah.
have healthy boundaries around yourself. And so it's just very, very
And
important.
and that's also a highly misunderstood area.
Hmm.
Oftentimes I find myself misunderstanding the
Yeah.
setting of healthy boundaries. I either
Yeah.
think it's cold and cruel,
Hmm.
or I think it's over the top, something like that. And
Hmm.
and it's not that's not what it is.
It isn't.
Healthy
If you're
boundaries lead
setting
to
a,
healthy relationships.
Yeah, if you're setting a healthy boundary, it's coming from the wisest part of you.
Right.
It's coming from a regulated self, right? A wise, regulated, clear self that cares about you, but also cares about the people you're with.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's great.
So it's really beautiful. So I want to just say to all the listeners, this is a complicated topic, and we definitely didn't cover it in all of its glory.
This is going to take some
But it's
time.
like a primer, and yeah, it's going to take some time. But this will give you some ideas to start thinking about. If you want to delve into this, you could read. If you want to delve into it in your romantic, marriage relationships, partnerships, you could read Secrets of a Passionate Marriage by David Schnarch. I would recommend that. Or another book that I give to a lot of clients is they're just trying to understand the basics of this is something called, it's a book called, it's kind of got a funny title, but it's a good one. It's called Everything Isn't Terrible by Dr. Kathleen Smith. It's kind of a really easy, accessible way to understand differentiation in the different kinds of relationships in your life. Another good resource for understanding more of this is called The Dance of Intimacy, I think. The Dance of Intimacy by Dr. Harriet Lerner. So those are three resources just off the top of my head that if people want to dig into this more, that they can.
Fantastic. Because we're going to dig into it more.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. That's
You're
awesome.
welcome. It's been fun.
I love learning this stuff, and I just hope our listeners will be so patient with it because uh, I I can attest to this. It works, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of like really cognitively trying to process and apply these concepts in order to see a difference.
Hmm.
So please be patient. We hope that all listeners will look into that and see it benefit their relationships.
Yeah. And if you're committed, you will see progress, and it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Amen
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
we've got some agendas for the next podcast. That sounds great.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Jill.
Okay. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, see ya. Bye.
All right. Bye.